exposing the real truth about Antarctica to the world. I know this is not the first time you've heard someone claiming to know the full truth about Antarctica, but everything that you have heard so far, both from people on this board and supposed truth tellers, has been a complete and utter lie. Claims about alien bases and mysterious portals to other dimensions are completely false. They sprinkle in bits of the truth that is observable just enough to get you falling for their web of lies. In truth, these are attempts by the people that I work for and the government to keep you in the dark. I believe you would call it a psyop. The goal is to get schizos and conspiracy theorists to cling to these small bits of truth and create a divide between them and people seeking the real truth. The more they parrot the fake stuff, the better it is for us. They want you to argue until you forget what the point of it even was, until you are just arguing for the sake of feeling right. I would apologize, but it really means nothing at this point. I can't even lie and say that I am doing something noble to try and save you, because in reality, this is still all for myself. I won't give you my name, but I will tell you that I am very well connected, and that is all you need to know. I don't claim to know everything, but I know enough. I won't be killed for revealing any of this, because regardless of what we do, people like us do not kill each other. They will punish me, but not in a way that I am worried about. I will not waste any more time with preamble. You have been lied to about the nature of Antarctica. The Antarctic Peace Treaty is made up, and it is just a cover. There is also no official ban on any military activity there, and again, this is just a cover. This is because Antarctica is not actually shared like you are led to believe. Antarctica is actually the 51st state of America and is controlled entirely by them. Researchers from around the world are only allowed to set up stations there and study at the behest of the United States. Let me explain how this happened. Antarctica was discovered in 1820 that we can prove by European explorers. There is, however, evidence to suggest that the Maori people found and set foot on the continent as far back as 700 AD. The evidence for this, though, is only passed down through their oral traditions, and so no written record has ever been found to confirm this as 100% factual. It was not until the Second World War that a country was able to fully stake a claim on Antarctica. Various other expeditions tried and failed. In 1943, the British launched Operation Tabarin, which was their attempt to fully control the continent. Argentina and Chile were also attempting to stake their claim since the outbreak of the war in 1939, but for complicated political reasons, the British triumphed over them. They did not succeed entirely, and because of the strain of the war, the operation ultimately failed, as they did not have the resources nor the manpower to maintain it, and had to pull out. This created the perfect gap to be filled. The United States managed to construct a series of 5 small bases near the Bay of Whales, which they named Little America. This was done under the command of Admiral Richard E. Byrd. These served as a strong starting point and foothold for the US, although these bases would be destroyed later due to the Bay of Whales drifting away and collapsing. As you know, the Antarctic Treaty was signed in the year 1959, but this treaty and everything that it encompassed was entirely for show. The United States has full control of the landmass with a large undocumented military presence that would be almost impossible to wrestle from the continent without outright destroying everything, which no country obviously wants to do. Not to mention it would cause the end of the world in the process. The US wants to keep all of its dealings here in the shadows and away from any prying eyes, and the elites have a large sway in this decision too. The elites have special plans for the continent and what we have discovered there so far, but I will not go into that right now. It would require an entirely new threat. Russia and China both signed the treaty because they had no choice. In public they are sworn enemies to act as useful scapegoats, but in reality, they can pose no significant threat. Let us fast forward to the present and to my direct involvement. Antarctica is incredibly large, no shit, and we keep making new discoveries there every single day. The US military has a specific sub-branch that trains personnel solely for the conditions of Antarctica and to be deployed there. They don't train up ordinary recruits though. These are people with connections. They are either related to elite bloodlines themselves, or to people in high positions in the government and the military. It is important that only the most trustworthy are involved. Those who are trained up to be stationed there remain there for most of their lives in many cases. Special exceptions are granted for a few, but not all. This basically minimizes the risk of any kind of leak, but this is a choice that people make. They make the choice to undergo this restriction and serve. Access to things like the internet is obviously heavily monitored, and food and supplies are rationed. All of the soldiers stationed there wear body cameras and helmet cameras that are recording at all times, except when they are off duty and are in their own quarters. A live microphone feed is also constantly active, especially when on missions. These feeds are able to be accessed by those with enough clearance at all times. I was present and watching these feeds when a routine operation was being undertaken. It was a search operation in which they would be following up on a lead that was received about a potential cavern that was located directly south of the base, a few miles away. They were to check out the lead and report back any findings. They were advised not to take any risks and not to venture in until it could be mapped out and the potential dangers canvassed. The wind was pretty strong, and so the video feed was choppy and frequently dropped in quality, but the microphone feed had no trouble, aside from the sound of the wind itself. It did not take long for them to stumble onto the place. It was hidden beneath a blanket of snow and ice, and you had to know what you were looking for to be able to spot it. They had specialized equipment with them to help with excavating the entrance, but it still took a significant amount of time. Once it was uncovered, they were ordered to report back to the base immediately so that the place could be risk assessed, but there was a bit of back and forth discussions between the soldiers and base command. They argued that by the time everything had been done, they could have already been in and out, and argued that they would not take any risks. They would just have a quick look, and that was it. They argued that there was no point turning back now. The higher-ups had a very in-depth discussion for quite a long while before they agreed to allow them to investigate themselves. I don't know why they changed their minds, but there must have been a special reason. They agreed to stay closely and record everything thoroughly. And with that, they headed straight into the place. The first part of the descent was a steep incline, and so harnesses and carabiners had to be used to rappel down safely. We were told by the head soldier that the temperature dropped suddenly as soon as they entered the place, and their vitals reflected this too. The descent was pretty rough due to the equipment they had to keep on them to make progress if they ran into any kind of obstacle. They proceeded very cautiously and were being wary of their every step in case the place collapsed or was unstable at any point. They were basically in uncharted territory. They had to keep stopping pretty frequently to make progress with the equipment, and progress took hours to be made at some points. They eventually chipped away layers of ice that coated the walls, and they revealed something very interesting. There were weird patterns all across the walls that were etched deep into them. They looked completely foreign and like nothing ever seen before on Earth. What we saw could only ever be described as a language. We theorize that it is similar to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, in which symbols are used instead of letters to create the words. It is not something we have been able to decode so far though. I'm not sure if it was because of the weak connection and low quality of the video feed, but the symbols seemed to almost move on their own. But I suppose this could have been a trick of the light also. They also glowed dimly, a kind of faint blue color, but again, this could have been the connection. From what we could gather from photos and videos, we predict that the etchings had been carved there thousands of years ago, and long before any kind of real human civilization. The team kept checking in regularly with us, and base command implored them to keep venturing deeper. They quickly reached another steep incline that they had to descend down with the harnesses and carabiners again. They made their way down and came into some kind of small chamber. This is where they made a crucial discovery. Arguably, the most significant discovery made on this continent so far. No, the most significant discovery made on Earth so far. They found bodies, preserved ones. They were covered in layers of ice. There were some kind of humanoid shapes, but with major differences to us. The arms and legs were mostly human, aside from being slightly elongated. Again, we do not have an exact figure on how long these bodies have been preserved for. It could have been in the last 100 or the last 10,000 years. Your guess is as good as mine. Again, there was a back and forth discussion before Command decided that they should very carefully extract one of the bodies from the ice to be brought back for study. It took them a long time to do this with the equipment that they were provided with, as they had to be extra careful. They could not just take back the bodies frozen in ice, as it would be much too heavy to carry while using the harnesses, along with carrying the other equipment, and if it was dropped, then the body would likely just shatter into pieces. They managed to finally free it, after what seemed like a lifetime. The body was pretty much perfectly preserved. The skin of the thing was incredibly pale and almost translucent in nature. The limbs were more elongated than that of the humans, and the whole body was sinewy. The long fingers of the body ended in nails that were like claws and looked incredibly sharp. They managed to secure the bodies in a containment unit that they were provided with. It wasn't built for the purpose of any corpses, and was actually designed for bringing back artifacts and precious metals, but it managed to do the job alright. All it had to do was stop the body from sustaining any damage until it could be brought all the way back. There was more than one preserved body there, but one was all that the team had room for, and all that we would need to begin for now. The journey back was much of the same, except slightly quicker, due to not having to carve out another path. They made it back with no issues at all. We are still in possession of this body, and it has been examined and tested on every single day since it had been brought back. We do not have any concrete information about its origins at the present moment, but we have learned quite a few things about the biology and physiology of the things. We do not have a working name for the species right now. There is more to this though. One of the soldiers who was part of the team got sick not too long after they made it back. It was slow at first. It started with just a bit of a cold and a headache, but eventually the vomiting came. The whole team had to be quarantined immediately. Our scientists did not actually expect anything untoward and just treated it as a precaution, but it was very lucky that they followed protocol and took it as seriously as they did. Examination of the body continued undisturbed, as the researchers were already wearing hazmat suits as per protocol, so any kind of infection was pretty much impossible. The vomiting was the least of the symptoms. The symptoms got progressively worse as the days wore on. They started coughing up blood, experiencing heavy fatigue, and also nausea that kind of racked the entire body. It was 3 days straight of these symptoms. Then they seemingly disappeared overnight. Of course, the medical team could not go in and examine them until the entire quarantine period had been completed. Even if they wanted to go in, it would never be allowed because it was too risky. 2 more days passed like this with no more symptoms, and things were looking up. The night of day 5 is when that was shattered. One of the soldiers woke up in the night. It was silent at first. The soldier looked incredibly groggy, and like he was struggling to move his limbs or get up. It was like a baby learning how to walk. There was a team on standby outside the quarantine room constantly to record symptoms and monitor the soldiers. The people on duty tried to talk to the groggy soldier, but he did not give any response. He looked up at the PA system in the room with utter confusion. He just turned his head to the side like a dog would. After that, everything was like a blur. All of the other soldiers in the room were still sleeping, but one of them broke into a mini coughing fit that kind of half roused him awake, but not fully. After that, the groggy soldier walked up to him, and before the coughing soldier could say anything, he had inserted both of his thumbs into the coughing soldier's eyes and pushed as hard as he could. The screams woke up the entire base, and it was like nothing I had ever heard before in my life. The other soldiers woke up in a state of complete shock, but were able to act quickly. A team of security were quickly dispatched to the quarantine room, but were stopped from entering by direct orders from command. The risk of contagion was still there, and we had no idea why this was happening, so it was too much of a risk to open it up. Not just the contagion risk, but command was interested in letting the scene play out and studying what was happening and if this was a side effect of whatever illness that they had. The soldiers managed to overwhelm the rabid one, but he did his best to scratch and bite and tear as much flesh as he could before being subdued. They had to tie him up. The tied up soldier eventually passed away after not receiving any food or water because the soldiers could not approach without risk of being bitten. His strength waned and he deteriorated like any normal human would. His desire to attack the other soldiers in there never gave up, even for a second. He spent every moment writhing and trying to escape and bite. Eventually, he just did not have the energy to move his muscles anymore, and his body gave in. The other soldiers eventually met the same fate, and they were just left in quarantine to be studied. Our researchers are still not sure of the exact science behind what unfolded. It was some kind of pathogen that was likely trapped in the ice with the being, but how it worked was not exactly clear. All we know is that any human or animal that comes into contact with that pathogen experiences those exact same symptoms until eventually losing control and trying to attack any living thing that they can see. It basically boils down to the virus making the person angry, I guess. Again, it is not exact science, but that is what we have. It makes the person angry and uses up the body until all of it is gone. I'm sure I don't have to explain the implications of this discovery if the exact science and how to apply this pathogen can be figured out. It would make the US even more powerful than they already are. Imagine it. They would not even have to send their own soldiers, because this pathogen would make them fight themselves. The implications of this are devastating, and it is very obviously making even some elites incredibly worried. If not controlled and contained properly, there could be some very catastrophic consequences. That is all the information that I have for you. Do with it whatever you will. Keep your eye on the news in the coming years. Be Grandpa, sometime around the 1940s I think. Deep South. Wild country bumpkins as far as the eye can see. There is a huge tree just north of Grandpa's hometown. A local legend claims the tree is haunted by a large man on a black horse. People have been said to make pacts with it. Others leave little offerings, hoping to gain favor from the tall man. Grandpa decides to make a deal with the evil spirit one day. Not gonna go into detail, but Grandpa was an orphan and his life was really rough. So Grandpa goes to the tree. A man on a horse steps out of it, almost like the tree was liquid instead of solid. The man is huge, and his face looks all puffy and blue like when someone drowns. Grandpa tells his story to the man. How he is starving and can't find work and has no money. How he is lonely and wishes he had a family of his own. So the man on the horse tells Grandpa to travel to a neighboring town. He will meet a woman there with lots of money. They will fall in love and get married, and with her money, they will be able to buy a farm. The farm will earn them a decent living, and it will stay in the family, but that two of his sons will leave for the city and go on to become educated men. Grandpa will live to see them prosper and become important people, but there is one thing he needs to do. There is a cave outside of town that belongs to the man on the horse. Grandpa needs to stop there on his way to the next town. He needs to write his name on the cave wall in his own blood, then everything will happen, just like the man on the horse said. Grandpa thanks him and leaves for the neighboring town. On the way, he finds the cave that the men told him about. He goes inside and finds the walls covered in names written in blood. Grandpa pricks his fingers and signs the wall as well, then he leaves. Long story short, Grandpa met my grandmother, whose family was really wealthy. She and Grandpa bought a farm, made a good deal of money, and raised my dad and his brothers. Several years before I was born, Grandpa woke up to find the man on the horse standing by his bed. He did not have his horse with him. The man told Grandpa that he would soon be a grandfather and that his grandsons would prosper, just like he promised. But, in the 45th year of his life, the youngest boy will be mine. Then he slowly faded away. I am the youngest of my dad's sons, by the way. Grandpa used to tell me this story and chuckle. He'd say there was nothing to worry about. He'd remind me that the name he signed on the cave wall was not his real name. After he had been orphaned, one of the families in his hometown took him in for a bit. The name they had given him was the name he had written on the wall, so I'm sure you have nothing to worry about. Then he would pretend to look confused and ask, "How old are you now?" I'd tell him, and he would nod very dramatically and say, "Yes, I am sure you will be fine." I know this was just a bedtime story my grandpa made up to scare me, but man, could the old man spin a yarn. I am 25 now, and it still kinda spooks me to imagine that he was telling the truth. I'll see if I can dig up some photos of the time I visited his farm and hometown. Don't have a scanner, so shit quality, but this enormous tree near my grandpa's farm is the exact same type of tree from his story, according to him. Terrible perspective, because I was 13 when I took this and was being an artsy moron, but it was much taller than a house, and you could not even wrap your arms halfway around the trunk. One more, just to give you a sense of how rustic the area is. Here is a short tunnel that we took between the farm and the town over. Grandpa said this thing was there when he was a kid. I posted a thread about this before, but it never really got much attention. Be my grandfather. Mother needs to be picked up on the other side of town one night in the 90s when she was young. He gets in his car and leaves to go and get her. Comes back, pulls into the driveway. Car engine shuts off. Massive aura of light appears over his vehicle and lights up the ground around the car. Trying and trying, but car still will not start. White dots start appearing everywhere, on the dash, the seats, everywhere inside the car, like a disco, sort of. To me, it seemed like some sort of scan. Pop was pissing himself in laughter because he did not have a clue what was going on and thought that the whole situation was funny. He was not even afraid, because at that moment, he did not think it was anything extraordinary. Light fades and goes away. Car is finally able to start again. Grandmother was watching from the window and said it looked like a spaceship. Still amazes me every time he tells it to me over a beer. Where and when was this on? Sometime in the early 90s, not sure of the exact year. And right here, where I am at right now. I still live with my grandparents in their house, as do my parents, because the house is kind of like a 2-story apartment. I am only 20 years old. If you meant by actual location, I'm from central Newfoundland, Canada. Not even really a hotspot for UFO sightings. There is one famous one from a cop in Clairville, back in the 60s. My pop also tells me that this house is built on top of an old Native American gravesite. There are a few of them scattered around the town and surrounding areas where I reside. I always feel a little uneasy when I'm outside at night by myself. I've experienced 2 orb sightings before too, one actually yesterday morning. I posted a thread all about it, but it got buried. Was hoping to get some good answers about what I saw. So, Close Encounters of the Third Kind and the X-Files were spot on. Yeah, fucking blew my mind when he first told the story, and I have never even seen the X-Files. The most interesting part about it though, that I haven't heard from any other story, are the white dots, and how they were moving around inside the car, kind of like a disco. How big were the 2 other orbs that you saw? What color were they? In the house or outside? First one was last October. Me and my brother went outside one night to smoke a joint. As we went out and turned to the right towards the neighboring garden, we both saw a bright, amber-colored orb floating above a birch tree. As soon as we caught eye of it, it started to move out of sight around the corner of our house. We have never seen it afterwards. Looked like it was about the size of a bowling ball or a basketball. Really hard to tell from a distance. And then yesterday morning, I went outside at around 4:50 a.m. just before the sun broke the horizon. As I was walking by the car in my garden, and I saw in the corner of my eye a pure white ball zoom by the car, did a little swirl, and went up over the garage about 15 to 20 feet away from me. Note that there was no wind whatsoever, and it had an unnatural white glow to it too. It wasn't dimmed by the early morning, but the thing is, it was really small compared to the first one I saw, like only an inch or two in diameter. We have no fireflies here, so I don't know what else it could have been. It amazed me though, and felt really positive seeing it. TLDR, first one was bright amber, and the size of a bowling or basketball. Second was only an inch or two in size, and pure white. Forgot to mention that it was only 3 to 4 feet away from me when I first saw the small one. Then it zoomed up, over the garage. Be me, 9 years old at the time. Grandma passed away, and we are visiting relatives for the funeral. They are gonna bury her at the village our relatives used to live in. Village is basically like a ghost town. Only 5 or 6 families live there. It is wintertime. Took us literally 5 hours to arrive in a cram-test car. Snow is knee-deep. First day having fun playing at snow with the kids of distant relatives. Don't know any of them. We are staying in a village house full of people, and they are heating the house with a coal furnace. First day passes by, trying to sleep in a room full of people. I am lucky to have a bed alongside the window. Cannot sleep, cause uncomfortable. Cannot leave the room either, cause cannot wake up others. Watching out the window. It is pitch black outside. Not a single lamppost, just a really dim light shining from a distance. Don't pay much attention and fall asleep eventually. Next day, other relatives arrive, so as the deceased grandma for burial. We bury her, and I spend the rest of my time hanging out in the village with my uncle, making a snowman, playing snowballs, etc. It is the second night, and I try to sleep at the same room I share with 10 other people. Only thing lighting up the room is the furnace, and the only sound that I hear is the crackling wood, strong whistles of wind, and occasionally some snoring. I cannot sleep yet again, watching out the window inside a heavy-ass blanket. No light outside, except that light I saw a day before, but this time it is closer. Squint my eyes to see better, but still cannot understand what it is. It is a dim orange light, flickering from time to time. Close my eyes to sleep, but no luck at all. Turning inside bed for a couple hours, trying hard to sleep. Open my eyes to take a look at the windows. Light is even closer. Now I can vaguely see what it is. A young woman in a really thin white nightdress, holding a gas lamp, standing there doing nothing in the freezing cold night. Cannot see her face. Think she is the lunatic of the village or something. Kinda scared, but also afraid of waking people up. Go back to sleep, hoping that she would go home. Take a couple of hours of sleep, but wake up in the middle of the night. Feel really uneasy. I look out the window again. She is gone. I feel immense relief, and then go back to sleep. Later that day, I am talking with a cousin from my mom's side, or I assume he was my cousin, because I don't really know any of my relatives from my mom's side. He, my uncle, and me are sitting in the house, talking about horror stories. They are talking about old folk stories that really spooked me out at the time. Guess no sleep for today. It is nighttime again. I try to head back to sleep. This time most of the guests have left, but we are planning to stay for a couple more days. Alone at room that night, feeling nervous and having a hard time getting to sleep. Want to watch out the window, but too spooked by the stories that I heard and the crazy lady that I saw, which I did not tell anyone for some reason, by the way. It is really snowy outside, almost like a snowstorm. The whistling of the wind does not help either. A cold breeze hitting me in the face, coming from the gaps around the window. Look outside to see the storm. The moment I turn my head, I see that crazy lady in that same nightdress, holding a gas lamp. She is not too close, but close enough so that I can see her face quite clearly. Stare at her for a couple of seconds, but she suddenly disappears into the snow. I want to scream, but I hold myself and stop myself. I get on the ground and spend all night fully awake. Later that day, do not talk about this to anyone, because asshole cousin already makes fun of me for being such a coward. Fast forward to a couple of years later. Visiting my grandpa, aunt, and uncle. They all live together. Seeing my aunt and my mom looking at an old photo album. Take a look at the album over my mom's shoulder. See an old picture of my grandma for the first time. She looks so different to how I remember. Grandma suffered from cancer and gained a lot of weight over the years, so this is not how I remember her at all. Take a closer look at the picture that is there in the album. It is the same woman that I saw that night. Wanted to talk about this to my mother, but did not want to bring back bad memories, so I dump it here.